Hello, role-playing people, and in this episode we're going to have a look at Paths of Enlightenment in Vampire the Masquerade, some general observations, explanations, and mechanics talk. I am including this one into the Sabbat series because most of the times I've seen someone misunderstand and botch role-playing a Path follower, it was probably during a Sabbat chronicle. And the player walked in thinking, oh yeah baby, I'm an inhuman monster who openly preys on the living, I've left behind any semblance of humanity, I'm part of a very volatile sect which, doesn't respect any rules and has infighting all the time and it murders mortals left and right. You murder some people when you observe the ritus, like the blood feast, you murder some people when you're stalking the streets looking for someone to feed on, and oh, of course, you murder anyone who tries to stop you from committing more murder. Oh yeah, I get to do whatever I want because I'm powerful and I don't have a conscience anymore. Whoopee! Well, I can't believe I'm about to do this, but I guess we need to make the distinction between wanton murder and ritual killing, because the two differ in purpose completely. For example, the victims of a blood feast aren't killed for any personal or even impassioned reason. Actually, they're very much depersonalized because the Canaanites who observe this ritus don't really know and don't really care or try not to care who those people are. Though they might feed on these living blood bags in ritual manner and in very creative ways, they do so with emotional distance. To them, these mortals are the sacrificial blood served as part of the ceremony, so the victim's very purpose is predominantly to feed the participants, to provide nourishment, to reaffirm that Canaanites are the shepherds of the children of Seth, if you will, and once that purpose is served, after seeing everything they've seen, well, the sacrificial lambs need to disappear for the sake of the silence of blood. Murder in itself is not the goal and it is not desirable, but it is done out of necessity or duty. As opposed to this, wanton murder has no greater purpose than the excitement and twisted joy of ending a life, and maybe reaffirming the murderer that they are powerful, they are in control. This sort of killing, when it is not performed out of some sick thrill chasing, might be done out of some other unbridled emotion, fear or anger, generally a loss of control and a heightened state of emotion. It actually seems to be a desperate attempt to regain that control over a person or situation, or maybe to right a wrong, to get revenge on a certain person or a group of people. In this case, it is very personal and emotional. There is no sense of duty or anything of the like. Now, a lot of players seem to equate being on a Path of Enlightenment with their protagonist's ability to kill anyone in any way at any time without caring one bit. But this really is not the case. Your character replaced their conscience with conviction, for sure, after they arrived to the conclusion or were forced into the conclusion that their unlife serves a particular purpose. But it is precisely that conviction which forces the character into a set of repeated habitual behaviors if they are to successfully evade wassail and not become a mindless beast. Do these behaviors include murder? Short answer, no. For the majority of Sabbat paths, the answer is no. Impassionate murder of mortal, animal, or maybe even Canaanite. Killing for the sake of it without a very good reason, just because you can and because it makes your unlife easier, is not tolerated. So now I want to have a look at all the Sabbat paths which consider murder a sin. Path of Honorable Accord, grievous sin, killing without reason. Life and death are God's to decree. Path of the Beast / Feral Heart, grievous sin, killing for any reason other than survival. A kill's purpose is sustenance. And then, within the same code of ethics, a moderate sin, killing without need. A dead vessel may not be fed from in the future. The Path of Orion, you are a hunter, not a murderer. Your goal is to be the ultimate hunter, and thus killing is simply a consequence of defeating and obtaining I don't know, trophies from creatures which are more powerful than you. The kill is done strictly as part of the hunt. The Path of Cain, though it doesn't clearly forbid murder as a sin, as a standalone tenet, those who worship Cain are nodists. They draw their notions of morality from the words of the Dark Father himself, and to that end, the Book of Nod clearly advises cohabitation with the children of Seth and rejects abusing your flock. The book says this about Cain. He knew sadness when he saw them abuse the children of Seth. In the rules of the Kanai, he says, "We are given dominion over the line of Seth, third son of Adam, as he is our youngest brother. We will watch over his children as if they were our own. We will show them the right way, and in return, they will serve us all of their days. Thou shalt not become as a god to the children of Seth. Thou shalt guide the children of Seth as a shepherd guides his flock, and cull them as they are needed. Thou shalt cleanse their blood and keep all of them free from disease." So Cain clearly warns against abusing and hurting the children of Seth, knowing full well that they will, and I quote, "rise up with weapons from one above and conquer us should we be as gods to them." Speaking of abuse, Path of Cathari, grievous sin, arbitrary killing. Killing a mortal absolves him of bringing about his own damnation. Path of Redemption, grievous sin, murdering innocents. With a mention that this path encourages, among other things, reminding mortals of the love of God, a love which is denied to the children of Cain. Even within the path of death and the soul, wanton murder is a grievous sin. Killing without studying death. Murder offers no opportunity to increase insight. Now, stepping outside of Sabbat specifics really quickly, Path of Lilith, moderate sin. Killing a living or unliving being. Death denies one the chance to transcend. The Path of Night, mostly practiced by the La Sombra. Moderate sin, intentional or impassioned killing. Death serves no one, it merely deprives one of a victim. Even when we look at a path such as the Path of Evil Revelations, we see the infernalist is a servant to a greater evil. He is not doing his own bidding, but the will of his demonic master or his superior in evil. As we can clearly see, there is no path of the murder hobo, and a Sabbat feeding need not end in the destruction of the herd. The next thing I want to bring up is the restrictions and interdictions of each path, along with the hierarchy of sins, because some players tend to ignore committing sins, or they tend to downplay the impact or gravity of certain behaviors, trying to twist the path into allowing behaviors it clearly doesn't, turning it into the path of whatever I was going to do anyway, as people refer to it. An example. Let's take the path of the feral heart. This path relies on conviction and instinct. The practitioner actively convinces themselves or is convinced by an external source that they are a beast in human form, a predator who cares not for complicated political machinations, owning mortal assets, or the latest tech gadgets, but survival in its rawest form. You emulate the behavior of wild animals in order to appease your beast and keep yourself from falling into wassail. Engaging in politics and using technology are sins ranked 9 and 10, so only the most enlightened practitioners of this path will successfully withdraw completely from politics and hunt only using fang and claw. Does that mean until you reach that point of progression, your character can casually use a mobile phone, use a gun, or drive a nice car with a hidden sunlight-proof compartment? No, of course not. For the same reason being Humanity 5 doesn't mean it's okay to steal. Oh, but that's a Humanity 7 sin, and I'm Humanity 5, so I can steal anything I want without suffering degeneration. No, it's not okay. It just means your character has had to commit that sin and has managed to suppress their conscience enough to do it again without hating themselves or having a moral crisis in the process. Yes, it means you won't suffer further degeneration upon committing that sin because you've jumped through all the mental hoops to either justify what you've done or make yourself not care. But under no circumstance do you believe it's okay now and you can just keep doing it casually. I mean, let's go to a real life example. If you're a Bible believing Christian and you believe the Ten Commandments are God's revealed word and there is a heaven and a hell, what, are you going to try and cheat the sin system by saying, oh, it's fine, I can drink, whore, and lie as long as I don't murder anyone, and that's going to keep me out of hell? No, that's not how this works. A Christian keeps in mind all of the commandments, regardless of where exactly they are on their spiritual journey, and they know any sin is wrong. Is stealing kinda okay because it's less bad karma than bullying someone? No, they're both bad karma, they are both transgressions. A Canaanite who's had their humanity battered out of them after a series of very traumatic experiences which broke their ego and sense of self to the point where they have to create or adopt a new self and a new moral system just so they don't go completely mad, rabid, and need to be put down like a dog. Do you think they're going to gamble on their ethics and hope they don't reach wassail? Do Christians gamble on whether committing a certain sin is going to get them into hell or not? Hell no! They're going to avoid those situations and show virtue as often as possible. Consider also that for all of these paths, conscience is replaced by conviction, a conviction which needs constant reinforcement through action and observation, like assessing your situation. That is how a conviction is created, right? Habitually. I believe I am a beast because I act like one, or have been forced or taught to act like one, because I hunt mortals in the streets using my vampiric gifts, which is not normal human behavior, because I can take refuge in a moldy cellar or in the earth itself just as well as a fancy sunproof bedroom with a waterbed, because I don't care about comfort or gadgets or politics or even clothes, but survival. My number one concern is survival. And I reinforce that persona, that self, habitually, every night, following instinct instead of self-control. And when I see a mortal running, for any reason, I run after them and eventually catch them in a dimly lit place when they're out of breath, and I feed, because the only way I can avoid truly becoming a rabid dog, chasing after speeding vehicles or anything that runs around, is if I behave like that intentionally every night. A beast I am, lest a beast I become. So no, when you're on a path of enlightenment, as with humanity, really, you don't take any breaks, you don't get free passes. But instead, you have lapses, you commit sins, and make mistakes. Don't think about this from the perspective of the player, right? Don't think about your moral progress as dots on a sheet, and beyond a certain level, you're safe, you can get away with transgressions. You don't just decide to stop being a tortured servant of hell because your path rating is so high, you can afford a good deed, right? I'm sure your demonic master who seeks to bring about the total corruption of the world won't mind a tiny little good deed, right? Right? I'm joking. Of course they will. No good deed goes unpunished. That being said, following a path always comes with reinforced, repeated behaviors that are not exactly normal by mortal standards or can be considered pathological, and it carries restrictions to behavior as well. There is no path of the badass stuff I was going to do anyway because I'm a big bad vampire. Please, don't cheapen or make light of the gravity of having your ego torn to shreds, abandoning your conscience and self-control, and being seduced or indoctrinated into believing that you are a wild animal or an agent of hell or a corrupter of both flesh and soul or the perfect hunter or a ruler who must do everything perfectly and his rule must be absolute and eternal. Adopting such a path is extremely traumatic for someone, not to mention very dangerous. If you don't make that transition successfully, bye-bye, game over, the character falls into wassail. So, following a path is hard and tricky. Speaking of hard and tricky, the storyteller might find it a bit difficult to remember the tenets and sins of like 5 different paths while actively scanning for any transgressions the protagonists commit during play, reminding players that, hey, certain behaviors might risk degeneration, as recommended by the core book. Running a game in which everyone is on a different path is hard. It's a lot to do. So, players, self-police and help the storyteller out, alright? You know your tenets better than everyone, and each sin committed is an opportunity for drama, growth, and showing off your protagonist. The morality system in Vampire is a dramatic narrative system, not something you should cheat or cheese into giving you more powerful results, nor is it something you need to actively worry about. Oh no, I'm losing stats. I lost stuff off my sheet, something that I had before and now it's gone. No. But we haven't really talked about how or why a character comes to adopt a certain path. The way I see it, the transition can be brought about due to internal motivation, which is when the character resonated with the path in some way, even as a mortal, or grows into it shortly after the embrace, again due to internal motivation, or you have external motivation, when said character is either seduced onto the path or forced onto the path. All sires embrace childer for a particular reason, whether business or personal, and when the embrace is done for business, the sire might prefer that the child also transitions from humanity onto a different path, so they might serve their purpose better. If your sire embraces you for your physicality because they need a bodyguard or a remorseless assassin, your humanity is only a setback. You'd be of much more use to them if you were on the Path of Orion or the Path of the Feral Heart, so they either work together with others to seduce and mentor you onto the path, or they plant the seed themselves if they themselves are a follower of that path. Sometimes, however, the sire might be less than patient, so they just force you onto the path. They break you down to the point where you don't know who or what you are anymore, strip you of all virtue, and then fill you with their own beliefs, reshaping you in their own image. I doubt the child of an infernalist would be gently seduced into serving a demonic master, instead being beaten and tortured repeatedly until they accept their role as a servant of evil. But hey, evil can be alluring and discreet, that's for sure. Now, let's exemplify transitioning onto a path due to internal motivation, which usually happens because the tenets of the path already make sense to you to some degree, and following them is like a reaffirmation of your beliefs. It makes sense, and it's going to lead you to something greater, a new level of perception or spiritual awakening. Imagine a person who, as a mortal, showed masochistic tendencies, a particular interest for various types of punishment, which they sampled like a gourmet, provided said punishment didn't cause any severe permanent damage. This person always found subtle ways of testing their endurance to pain and test their resilience in turbulent situations. Then they were embraced in a very brutal manner and subsequently forced to fight for their unlife or endure a lot of physical pain in order to survive. Maybe at some point they needed to amputate their own limb to escape captivity, or they were horrifically burned by the morning sun before finally finding refuge from its rays. Then they endured endless nights of burning, stinging pain without any relief, without any breaks, before their body finally healed and the pain was over. Certainly, this must have been traumatic, and it wasn't necessarily done by choice, but in surviving such turbulence and agony, especially considering this person's tendencies, even as a mortal, they realized they have a strength others might not have. They have experienced a degree of pain most mortals cannot even imagine. And this process already began during their mortal, probably formative years. In current nights, they've come to the realization that this new undead body of theirs, their vampiric condition, allows them to recover from physical trauma which would leave an ordinary mortal crippled for life. But to a vampire, losing a limb is no longer a life-altering event, a permanently crippling tragedy, because said limb can be regrown in a few seconds with the expenditure of a blood point. However, most will avoid such activities because they still have the pretension of being human, right? Our character, however, is starting to lose that, to abandon such ideas. Like the salamander or the tuatara detaches its tail, they've experimented with pain to the point where they can slice off their own limbs without so much as letting out a single cry of pain. The flames or acid burns which disfigure mortals definitively is something they can undo, something they can heal with enough patience and blood expenditure. They embrace their superhuman nature and realize their fear of pain is the only thing holding them back from becoming unstoppable. But wait, given their practices, they seek out knowledge, models, teachers, patron saints, or what have you, whatever you want to call them. Beings of similar mind, and maybe, by chance, they discovered the lore of Lilith and the cults of the Bahari. So now our character receives reinforcement of their beliefs and their fascination with becoming stronger through pain from an external source as well. Yes, enduring agony has elevated you and taught you, as it taught Lilith when she wandered alone and hungry, as she too endured unimaginable pain in order to survive, as she watched her children being slaughtered and her garden ravaged by Cain while she was powerless to retaliate. She too suffered, just like you. She too felt powerless, just like you. But then she rose. So now you feel validated, your pain is acknowledged and even admired by others. You are a part of a community, a family, if you will. All that's left is to fully embrace their instruction, receive the teachings with open arms, and clarify the tenets in your head. But long before you got to this point, it was you who started on this path. Long before learning of Lilith and her trials, because you believed nothing worthwhile is ever easy or painless, so you've always embraced that pain. If anything, the path just made things clear. It fit you like a glove, and now you will share your lessons with those who want to learn. Now, after your humanity has been completely drained out of you, pain has become a mere experience, an instrument of meditation, something you cherish as much as pleasure, as much as knowledge. Nothing worthwhile can be created without blood, sweat, and tears, and you can provide all three, without a doubt. So, you see, a path isn't necessarily something that's beaten into the character by force, but it might be the answer to a prolonged question the character seeks on their own. Even though I didn't go into the details and tenets of each path, hopefully you can see from the examples that playing a path follower is a challenge. And precisely because it's so challenging, I like to reward my players for it. Here's how I do it. Normally, those on the path of humanity can use Blush of Life. If their path rating is 8, they need not spend Vitae, and if lower, they spend a number of blood points equal to 8 minus their current path rating. They are great at blending in with mortals when they use this, but their frenzies either don't happen or they're completely out of control because they practice the virtue of self-control. If that fails, bam, mindless animal. For characters who no longer have conscience and self-control and no longer see the need to blend in with mortals, such as those on the path of Orion or Feral Heart or Evil Revelations, I see the Blush of Life as something that is no longer available to the character because they no longer perceive themselves as human. Why would you need rosy cheeks or a functional respiratory system or a functional reproductory system to seduce your prey and blend in if you are a hunter? You stalk and pounce on your prey from the shadows in this concrete jungle which is your feeding ground. To make up for this, remember how those who practice instinct don't really prevent going into a frenzy? The frenzy always happens, but rather they channel it, they direct it as they see fit. A lot of players, including my own, sometimes overlook or forget the benefits of frenzy, which are described on page 298 of the core book, and I quote, "A vampire in frenzy gains several temporary benefits from this state. Vampires in frenzy completely ignore all dice pool penalties inflicted by injury until the frenzy ends. Once the frenzy is finished, the pain comes back and the crippling effects of the wounds take hold again. All difficulties to dominate or otherwise mentally control a frenzied character are increased by 2, and all difficulties to resist the effects of such mental control are reduced by 2. The character never needs willpower rolls to accomplish a feat because the rage fueling the vampire's action is both a catalyst to a heightened state of mind and a barrier against unwanted intrusions. Lastly, characters in frenzy are immune to the detrimental effects of Rotschreck. Splendid. So, this isn't the main reason, but one of the many reasons why the Sabbat is such a powerful fighting force. You don't prevent it. You can't prevent your frenzy, but you ride the wave of frenzy. You use and channel your inner beast with such rage that you cannot be easily commanded. You feel no pain whatsoever, no fear even in the face of fire or sunlight, and you automatically succeed willpower rolls. Now, I don't think this is what they meant in the book, but as a homebrew reward, if you will call it that, I also treat any roll of the Cainite in frenzy as if a willpower point had been spent on it without the character actually losing said willpower point. So in a frenzy, the Cainite always has at least one success and is immune to botches when it comes to physical actions, running and dodging and fighting and what have you. So this is an empowering little rule that my players absolutely love, and I think it's a fair exchange for basically being unable to use Blush of Life. Certainly, some paths might still permit Blush of Life depending on Storyteller's preference, such as the Path of Cathari, because the whole point of the path is that practitioners are alluring, sensual, and they even have a bearing of seduction, right? So then it's not far-fetched to say a Cainite on this path needs appearance-enhancing tools to get closer to the mortals they're about to corrupt, especially given that sensuality and sex are very powerful tools of this type. Alright, I'm going to stop here. This is about as far as I can go without detailing each path individually, but to sum up, Most paths don't condone murder. Most paths will not allow your character to do whatever they want. Rather, they force a Cainite into a repeated set of habitual behaviors which they will perform ritualistically lest they risk falling into wassail, becoming pure beast. There are many ways in which a character can become a path follower, but my three go-tos are they were seduced or recruited onto the path, they are forced onto the path, or quite rarely, they intrinsically resonate with some, if not all, tenets, and they adopt the path of their own volition. My recommendation is that the players know their tenets very well. After all, your character's sense of self hangs on these tenets. And do help your storyteller handle degeneration roles, because remembering 5 different paths and actively scanning for violations while also describing the scene and role-playing 4 different NPCs with specific speech patterns and hidden motivations might be a bit too many processes for one person to run at the same time. Lastly, I encourage players to see their protagonist's descent on the moral ladder not as a loss of stats, which brings about a loss of mechanical benefits, but as a dramatic narrative opportunity. This is your chance to show everyone how the character is struggling, how they are becoming less lucid night after night. The mask of conviction begins to crack. Their deeply traumatized human self, who is confused and lost and horrified of what they've done, begins to show, and in that vulnerable state, from the darkness below, the beast takes over more frequently and is lashing out at everyone, threatening to take over once and for all. And on that, air quotes, very optimistic note, thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.